In this After Effects tutorial, we're going to do some planar tracking with Mocha AE. There are a number of different ways that we can track data in Adobe After Effects. We've talked about a couple of them in class, and I want to show you some of the disadvantages or some of the negatives in trying to track stuff using some of the native applications in After Effects, and then show you an alternative to track information, which coincidentally also happens to come with After Effects as a third-party install. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to take this clip and create a sequence. And because we're being good, we'll go ahead and put our sequence into the right comp folder. And we can see that we have just your traditional phone screen replacement. It is a 1920 by 1080 project. It is 2997, and it matches the size and the duration of our original clip. Now, we can see that there's a hand reaching in and the phone's moving around, and we want to replace the green screen with this intro, okay? And I think I have this pretty much lined up to trigger when the hand presses the screen. But we'll come back to this layer in just a moment. I'm just going to turn off its visibility. And one of the first things that we've talked about in the past when it comes to tracking data is the track motion option inside of After Effects. And of course, we want to make sure that we are on the correct layer when we click on that. So I'm going to click on track motion, and you can see we get the single point tracker. And again, it's tracking a point. And we can even turn on rotation and scale if we need to. And we can get two boxes that we can track, but that's not really going to help us when we're trying to track this entire phone. So what we need to do is we need to go under the transform property, and we need to click on that, and we need to select the perspective corner pin, which is what we're going to use. And you can see now that we have four tracking options and four tracking markers. So what we could do in this example is we could move our little tracking point up here to the corner. And I'm going to remember these little points, these little crosshairs represent where the new data is going to be placed, or the new information is going to be placed or corner pinned to the screen. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because this is technically not going to work. And then we have our search region and our tracking region options. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move these, move everything over here to the big X's. And then I'm going to move the point data or the tracking data to each of these corners. I might be able to do it just by, there we go. Nope. Yeah. So I'm going to move these tracking and search areas around a little bit. And again, come up here to the top and do the same thing. Get right on that to where it turns white, and then I can move the entire search region and the search box. And so I'm tracking these squares, or I'm sorry, these crosses on our screen. And if I reposition everything, if I fit it onto the screen, and we decide that we are going to start to track our motion, let's see how good of a track that I have set up. And you can see as this is moving through, yeah, we've got some pretty good data. The tracking markers on the phone are following along quite nicely. Our little corner pin information is there. It's staying around. It is jiggling around a little bit. This doesn't look like a bad solution, although we have seen already that one of our tracking points has already come loose. So we could back this up. And as we've talked about before, zoom in, reposition this information as needed. It looks like it's pretty good up until about right there. So, we'll just move things around. Everything looks good. Continue tracking. I mean, we could do that all we want. But notice what happens the minute that the hand reaches into the shot. It covers up so much of the tracking data that our track points and everything just get blown all out of whack. And because the hand is covering the screen, we really don't know where that corner is. And so we're going to end up with some horrible tracking data. So while this is nice, and it does work anytime that you have an uninterrupted view of what you're trying to replace, it really doesn't do a great job, unfortunately. Now, another option that we could try, of course, is track camera. So let's go ahead and track camera and see what happens. Okay, well, let's go over to our composition window. There we go. It's already tracking in the background. Okay, tracking is complete. It only took about a minute to track this 13-second clip. And as we scrub through it, well, we see a couple of points here and there, and we see some stuff on the floor. A lot of this, though, has to do with the noise in this very low shot, but we don't really have anything on our phone. In fact, I was really surprised that this even tracked at all. This should have created a big old no-no and said, no, there's very little information that we can track in this shot. And that's because this shot has very little depth in that the camera is not moving. It's a locked off shot. And so After Effects doesn't know whether the hand that moves into the shot is closer to the camera or the phone or the couch in the back, where they are in 3D space. It doesn't have that ability. It doesn't have LiDAR built into it. So it is a failed track. It really can't track anything if the camera and objects are not moving in relation to one another. So what do we do? Well, I want to show you, I'm going to go ahead and again make sure that our phone layer is selected. I'm going to go up here to Animation, and I'm going to go do Track in Boris FX Mocha. Now, you may have Mocha AE. You may find this also in the effects under Boris FX Mocha, Mocha AE. Okay. I'm going to use the Mocha AE. If you don't, you can use the Boris FX Mocha. In fact, we'll just go ahead and use this one. I'm just going to go ahead and click on the Mocha icon, and that will launch Mocha AE. And that will open up the Mocha interface. And I'm going to be working in the essential mode, even though there are classic modes, big picture, roto, and a bunch of other options that you can use. And if you have Mocha Pro, you're going to have even more options that you can do with this application. Now, Mocha is a little bit different in that it is tracking groups of points, or tracking planes, in this case, in this example, of information that we can then use to track or lock other layers onto, do our corner pinning, etc., fairly easily. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to use the X-Spline tool, which is located right here. And I like the X-Spline tool. First of all, let's make sure that we're at the beginning of our timeline. I like the X-Spline tool because it very quickly allows us to create a spline around our object. Now, I've already laid down the 4 points. I'm going to go ahead and right-click to close that off. And then I can go in and reposition these. You don't have to have a really tight tracking area, but I'm just going to tighten this up just a little bit. And if we want, we can pull on these handles and move them from very rounded edges to very hard edges just by dragging on these corners. Now, what we've laid down with the X-Spline is kind of like our search region. What Mocha is going to do is it's going to search everything within this region and look at all the pixels and see how they shift and move and change over time. So for this example, we probably want to use transform, scale, rotate, skew, and perspective, since this phone is going to rock back and forth and do a lot of different things. But this area, this red area where our spline is, does not define where the layer will be attached to. It's simply our search area. So I'm going to go over here to layer 1, and let us just rename this phone BG. In order to see where elements will be placed to or attached to within this area, we need to turn on the Show Planar Surface, and that is this blue box right here. Might be a little hard to see depending on compression, but I'm going to go ahead and take these elements and I'm going to move them to the very specific corners of our frame where I want that final phone screen to be. And I can use the magnify tool and I can zoom in. And I can use the hand tool to just kind of move around and then go back to the pen tool. And I'm just going to move these around until I get these corner parts to align both along the vertical and horizontal edge of the phone. So maybe something like that. Go back to my hand tool and do the same over here. And move this around just a little bit, maybe something like that. And you can see we're way off down here. I'm just going to pull this back in. Something like this. And then our final corner right down here. And we should be good to go. So I can just zoom out and reframe our area. And the only thing that I have left to do, and I guess I should show you before we click on that, is the Show Planar Grid. This is going to show us a grid that kind of gives us an idea of how well our tracking is attached to this surface. So I'm going to turn all three of these on for just a moment, just so we can kind of see how well the tracking is going. And when I'm comfortable with everything the way it is, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Track Forward button until we run into a problem. And right here, once again, we run into our problem with the hand reaching in and potentially throwing off our entire track. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop right there. And what I'm going to do is I want you to look down here in our timeline. This little green dot represents a keyframe for our tracking information. I'm just going to go back to right about here before the hand comes in. And I'm just going to click on Add New Keyframe. Now, I was very surprised that this track held as well as it did as the hand started to move in. But you can see from the planar information, the grid, how locked on this layer is. In fact, if we go over to the layer properties, we can look at inserting a logo, and we can see how does that logo work within this space. And I think it works pretty well. It doesn't drift around very much. But I am concerned that when that hand moves in, that it's going to throw off all of my tracking data. So here's what I want to do. I am going to deselect everything by just clicking in an empty area. I'm going to turn these two elements off for a moment. And I'm going to scrub down to the point right where the hand is. And let's go back to this layer right here and change this back to none. And then click off. I'm going to go right to the point where the hand is fully touching the phone right there. And I'm going to grab my X spline again, and I'm going to draw a real quick spline. It doesn't have to be tight, although Mocha does do some really good, amazing things with rotoscoping. And so I'm just going to draw a really quick spline around this hand. I'm going to rename this hand. And the other amazing thing that's great about Mocha, especially when it comes to planar tracking, is that it tracks top to bottom. So the hand, for example, is going to be its own separate track, but it knows that it should not use that data or that information that's contained in that, that layer area for the phone tracking. The other thing we should probably do is turn off this little tracking indicator for phone background at the moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now track this hand backwards and forwards through our shot until it's completely out of the scene. And one of the things that is going to happen is that very quickly this tracking data should fail. So I'm just going to track this backwards. And you can see that it's already starting to slip. So I'm just going to go back a little bit and use my tool to move this finger, move these points around the finger, just so that everything looks good, and then I will continue to track backwards. It's doing a pretty good job, except for right there. So now we can drag all of these points, and I'm just going to move them back. Because really what we're more concerned about is not the stuff on the backside of this track, but more the stuff that's crossing over at the front of the phone. I'm going to track backwards some more, and then of course I'm going to have to move all these points around. And you can see it's creating a number of different keyframes down here in this little timeline. And I'm going to go ahead and just track backwards just a little bit further until everything is well off the screen of the phone. Then I'm just going to jump ahead to this end keyframe, and I'm clicking this button down here to advance to the previous and next keyframes. And now I'm going to track forward. And we run into, I'm just going to stop it. Now, depending on how well your tracking is set up, Mocha may just stop and say, hey, I can't track any information. I'll just go ahead and continue to track forward again. You can see right here, tracking terminated prematurely. That's because it's lost the ability to track. I'm just going to go in and move all of these points themselves. Whoops, too much. Too many points selected. So let's just grab the points individually. This is fine, no big deal. We've done this before with tracking where sometimes you do have to stop and track frame by frame so that this information can get out. So again, I'm just going to go forward one frame, and I think I will now just go ahead and start to track this as a group. Move forward another frame, move it again, track forward another frame, and now this is enough tracking data where this is out of the picture. Maybe we need to go here, do that, and maybe one more time right there. And we should be good. So what's happening now is Mocha is saying, okay, we've tracked this hand layer, and now we're going to go back and track this phone layer. And I'm going to go back, I'm right at my previous keyframe. I can track forward now, and now when the hand moves into the shot, the surface information and the grid information should not be disrupted by the hand. So let's track this forward to the end of the shot. And there we go. Everything looks really good. I'm going to just move this one off a little bit. And because there is not really any key point data associated with the little blue surface area, I can move that and refine it through this project. But now if we go back to our layer properties for the phone layer and I turn on like a grid, we can see and we can play through and we can see how well our tracking has occurred. And that's a really solid track. That looks really good. So backwards and forwards, this, I don't see any chatter. I don't see any jumping around. I don't see any drifting. It looks pretty solid. So if we're satisfied with our track, we do need to save the information. Just saving it into a temp file, right? And then we can close Mocha. And now we're back into After Effects. So big important thing. Remember, anytime we're pasting data into our scene, let's make sure that our timeline indicator is back at the beginning of our project. I'm going to turn on the visibility for our phone layer, the replacement screen layer. And then with the background plate still selected, I'm going to go up to tracking data and I'm going to say create track data. And we don't want to use the tracking data from the hand. We want to use the tracking data from the phone. So we want to make sure that the little gear is turned on for the phone background. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. And then we are going to say, hey, we want to use this data and apply it to a corner pin or a transform or a corner pin that supports motion blur. And, you know, I kind of wish this was the default, but for us, we always want to try to choose corner pin that supports motion blur. Then we get to pick which layer we're going to apply this data to. In this case, it's our phone intro. And then we can apply the effect and boom. Well, that didn't work, did it? I mean, if we scrub through our timeline, oops, we scrub through the timeline, it looks like everything is aligned, but it's off track by quite a bit. And there's a reason for this. I'm just going to undo this. And that is because what Mocha is doing is it looked at the entire screen of information, the 1920 by 1080 screen, and said, okay, let's take all that tracking data that we've done and let's apply it to a layer that matches this exact same size. But we don't have a screen that's 1920 by 1080 for our phone. In fact, if we look at our phone layer, the phone is quite the opposite of that. It is 498 by 1080. So how do we get these things to line up? Well, the easy way to do this, and the correct way to do this, is to create a pre-comp by pressing Command, Shift, and C, or Control, Shift, or what is it on the PC? Alt, Shift, and C? Whatever it is on the PC, I don't know. I use a Mac. But I'm using Command, Shift, and C to create a pre-comp. And for those of you that don't know what a pre-comp is, it's kind of like nesting layers like you might find in your nonlinear editing system. We can just leave this as is, but I'll just go ahead and rename this Phone Intro Pre-comp. And I want to select Move All Attributes into the new comp and adjust the composition duration to the time span of the selected layer. Maybe yes, maybe no, that you want to do that. You don't always have to do that, but I'm going to go ahead and select that now. And I'm going to also say Open New Composition so that when I click OK, it's going to open up a new composition called Phone Intro Pre-comp. And we'll notice that it is another composition that's 1920 by 1080, but that it has our layer right here. What I want to do is I want to stretch and manipulate this layer so that it is 1920 by 1080. And the easy way to do it is go to Layer, Transform, Fit to Comp. Then when I go back to our main comp that we're working with, again, you can see that our phone has been stretched to size. So now when we go back to our background layer and we go back to our effects tab and we say corner pin that supports motion blur, we want to make sure that it's still selecting the phone layer. And this time it's saying the pre-comp. Now when we apply the exported data, boom, it lands right there on our phone. And if we make a RAM preview, this should track perfectly. And it does a pretty good job. I don't see any drifting. I don't see any jittering. Now, the problem that we have, obviously, is the hand reaching in, and it's below the phone layer, or below the phone replacement layer. So we need to fix that. How are we going to fix it? Well, we're not going to do any rotoscoping. Remember, this screen is green. I'm just going to drag this phone pre-comp layer down below. And on our background layer, I'm just going to do key light with the key cleaner and the advanced spill suppression. I'm just going to drag it right on there. I'm going to pick our green color. And boom, that does a pretty good job right there. We can go in and look at the combined matte. We can see that there's a lot of chatter around here. So we're just going to go to our screen matte and we're going to, let's see, clip our whites until that's all gone away. And we can clip our blacks till that's all gone away. And for this example, you can go in and you can continue to tweak this matte and refine this matte as much as you want. But I think that since this is a tracking project and not really a keying project, go back and see the previous lectures on keying. What I just want to do right now is get in here and look at my intermediate result and my spill suppressor, which will get rid of a lot of the green that's on my thumb and my hand. And basically we're done. This moves by so quickly that we have a nice little composite of our new screen on this phone. All right, that looks pretty good. I do want to point out a couple of things about the spill suppressor and what it's removing in the green. I just want to point out that there was a gray card kind of right in front of this phone. And the phone, I probably should have turned down the brightness because that green was really bouncing forward and then bouncing backwards. And you can see that there is a lot of green spill back here on the back of the couch and on this pillow. Notice what happens when I turn this on and off. You can see that there's a lot of green spill that's going on in this image. Fortunately, the advanced spill suppressor does a pretty good job, but if you see a bunch of chatter and junk, you might want to go in and turn on reduce the chatter and crank that amount up quite a bit if you have problems with noise or other information in your key. The one final thing that I want to do, and this is just really quick and dirty, is I want to try to match the color of this CG layer with the rest of my scene. As we can see, this screen looks really sharp for what we're looking at. Whoops, don't want to move that layer around. It looks really sharp, even though this is video, even though we're have some CG elements here. It just looks a little bit too sharp. So two things that I'm going to do. First thing that I'm going to do to this layer is I'm going to put a Gaussian blur. I guess you could put a fast blur on here, but I'm always been a big fan of the Gaussian blur, and I'm going to apply this to the phone pre-comp layer. I'm going to turn that up to about 2 or 3, just depending on taste. And you can see it doesn't do a whole lot, but it does just fuzz those edges out just a little bit. If I take that down to 2, it just softens those edges a little bit to help it look a little bit more believable in this shot. Now, obviously, we are dealing with a lit up screen, so color doesn't necessarily, and intensity and brightness doesn't necessarily have to match the surroundings. But if we wanted to make this match a little bit more with the surroundings, here's a really cool, quick, down and dirty way to get your CG elements to match with the rest of your scene, and that's to apply the tint effect onto this phone layer. And what I'm going to do, obviously right now it turns it completely to black and white, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the black eyedropper and select something that should be black in this scene, maybe like my watch or the couch. I'll probably pick the couch right there. We could see if there's any difference with my watch up here. Not really a whole lot. And then I'm going to use the white color picker to pick something that should be white, like this baseboard over here in the shot. And you can see it kind of makes it a kind of a brownish color, which is kind of what the whites are in this scene. They're kind of brownish and muddy. Obviously, this doesn't look good for our video element because we don't need this to be black and white or muddy and white. But if I reduce this down to, say, 20% or even 30%, it does take the edge off of the whites and the rest of the colors in our scene and does help blend these elements together. It's still projected. We can still do a brightness contrast if we wanted and turn the brightness values down. But this, I think, creates a little bit, personally, you may not agree, creates a little bit better blending of what that phone might look like in this real environment if we were playing this video from the phone in the scene for real. Final thing that we need to do is we need to turn on motion blur for this layer and turn on motion blur overall, and then take a look at our final result. So there you go, planar tracking in Mocha AE. You can find the link to the project files below, and if you have any questions, please ask. Hopefully you've learned a little something, and this will help you in your next screen replacement. Thanks for watching.